Welcome to the JC podcast, a place where we get to explore and unpack life topics in a confusing and fast changing world. I'm your host, James, and this is our third episode, I believe, for the JC podcast. It's a new passion project of mine, just being able to discuss topics and hopefully, invite some people along as well to learn from them and from their experience and wisdom so that we can all just hopefully live this life better equipped. A bit about me, if you're new to this podcast, I'm 30 years old, I'm single. I live in Melbourne, Australia, and I've been a pastor for over 5 years now. And I was overseeing the youth and young adults ministries in my church. But now I'm currently on a sabbatical just from burnout and just taking the next few months to just rest and to recover, but to also explore some passions, which includes this podcast. So thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Now, in the last episode, we talked about online dating and, kind of outlined three different points on, how we can date better and things to consider when dating. In this episode, I thought it'd be really good to talk about finding contentment in singleness, right? We talked about dating, but what about singleness? And in this episode, we're going to be talking it through a Christian perspective. Not to say that if you're not a Christian, that this won't apply to you. I think there are definitely some good things to really consider and think about, even though it's from a faith perspective. So don't let that turn you off from this podcast. But we are going to be talking about faith. We're going to be talking about God and how that shapes our perspective. So as I shared, I've been in the online dating scene for about a year or so now, and currently I'm just on a break from that. So what that means is that I've just hidden or deactivated my profile, and I've uninstalled the app. So I'm not seeing that on my phone every day. I'm not getting notifications. And this is not the first time that I've done something like this. I have done this a few times, and the reason I've kind of taken a break is that I've found myself becoming discontented with my singleness. So when I'm on the apps, and again, I kind of go in depth into what I think about the apps, especially in the first and second episode. But when I'm on these apps, I find that if you're on there for too long and things aren't really working out, that you can just become discontented with singleness. Essentially, you're saying you become more desperate. You become more annoyed with the fact that you're single. You're like, why aren't things working out? And so I find it's good to sometimes intentionally just take a break from dating apps or even from dating if you're not using dating apps, so that you can find that contentment again. And so I'm just currently on one of those breaks. But that doesn't mean that I'm not looking for a relationship. It doesn't mean that I'm not, that I'm just closed myself up. I'm just being intentional about the apps. So back in April in 2023, our church ran a young adults gathering. And in this young adults gathering, I preached a message called Undivided Attention. And it focused on the gift of singleness in a gospel-centered community. And I recently went back to that message that I preached, and I was actually encouraged and I guess challenged by my past self on that message, right? So when I listened to it, I was like, oh, okay, I was actually edified by that. It's pretty funny that you can be encouraged by your past self. So I thought it would be great to kind of just summarize and kind of rehash some of the main points from that sermon on this podcast. I encourage you, if you're interested in listening to that, you can listen to the whole thing. You can go to our church website, lifegatechurch.org.au, and under messages, you can go to the young adult messages, and you'll be able to find it there. Just scroll down until you see Undivided Attention. So in this podcast, we're just going to keep it to, I guess, kind of 3 points that I just want to highlight when it comes to finding contentment in singleness. All right. And so we'll just get into the straight one. So the first point is, you might often hear this. People say, why do you need to get married? Isn't God enough? Right? I think it's a common thing that some people might have, this conception that, hey, why do you need to get married? Why do you need to be in a relationship? Isn't God enough? Like we say that God is more than enough for us. So what's the deal with that? And what you'll find is that actually, you think about it, one of the first commands in the Bible is to be fruitful and multiply, right? God has given this command to be fruitful and multiply. And what that means is essentially to have babies. And that means to, be in a covenant together and to, reproduce, right? And God has given us our sexual organs to reproduce and have offspring. It's a very intended purpose, right? Even in Genesis, before sin even entered the world, right? We know about the fall. But in the garden, God said that it was not good for man to be alone. So on one hand, you have a practical aspect that we were given organs and sexual parts to reproduce and have offspring. But the second part is that God says that it is not good for man to be alone. Everything else is good, but he says it's not good for man to be alone. And of course, we have people like Jesus and Paul who, of course, they live very fulfilled lives of service to their calling without ever dating and getting married. So we understand that. But the fact that God said it is not good for man to be alone also shows that there is an important place for relationship and for marriage, right? When we see that, when it says good, it's not good for man to be alone, and he gives Adam, a woman, he doesn't give Adam a man, right? He doesn't give him a companion that is the same gender. He gives him a companion that is uniquely a woman, different from him. Furthermore, Paul himself recognizes the challenges of just having sexual inclinations, right? He says in 1 Corinthians, he makes it clear that it is better to be married and to have sex within the confines of marriage than not marrying and burning with passion, as he were to say. So when people say, like, why not get married? Isn't God enough? Like, yes, God is enough, but then there is a certain aspect of our being that we have sexual organs for the purpose of reproducing, but then we know that it is not good for man to be alone, and that God actually creates, woman outside of man. And so it's not just men altogether, it's not just women altogether, but there is a unique relationship between a man and a woman. Now, of course, there is challenges with that, because that's not to say that everybody is, in a way, destined to be married. That's not the case, right? But there is to saying that it is okay to have that desire, and that in a way that desire is built into us to long after having a life partner. So if you're feeling that and you say, hey, I feel like God should be enough, like, yes, God is enough for us, that we can actually live this life. We can go through the struggles of this life with God being enough. But then there is also the unique struggle that we have of longing for a life partner, longing for companionship, right? Even for sexual desires as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to, as we think about finding contentment in singleness, is to keep an eternal perspective, right? So on one hand, yes, we have desires to be married, and that, God is enough, but we have the desires. But then the second is to keep an eternal perspective. And I think really it's ultimately thinking bigger than just a relationship and thinking about your whole life. So I'll preface by saying that, we can think about, yes, we want a relationship. And again, as I said, that's important and to think about, because we have those desires. But we also have to think about our time on this earth is so small compared to what awaits us in eternity, right? It's such a small fraction, our time on this earth. And so when we think about our desires, which includes our desire for marriage and desire for companionship, but it includes other desires, desires to be, financially stable, desires to be, to be successful. All these desires are so small when it comes to eternity. And so we have to put that in an eternal perspective. I recently went to a Christian singles conference. It's called the Indivisible Conference. It's run by Pastor Joel. And there were a few guest speakers at this conference. But something that really stood out to me and was such a great reminder was something that one of the guest speakers said. And the guest speaker was Randell. And she said that our primary calling is to be in personal relationship with Jesus and faithfully live out the life that he has for us. That is where fulfillment and purpose collide. I'll just say that again. Our primary calling is to be in a personal relationship with Jesus. That's our number one calling. That's the biggest thing that we should be worrying about on this life, and faithfully live out the life that he has for us. that is where fulfillment and purpose collide. And guess what? That is not dependent on your marital status. You can be in a fulfilling and a complete relationship with Jesus Christ and be single for the rest of your life. That is possible, right? And so it's to say that at the end of the day, that's the thing that really matters. When it comes to like, would you rather someone who is desperate to be married have that marriage, or would you rather have them know the fullness of a relationship with Jesus Christ? And like, which one would you rather? And of course, it's always the relationship with Jesus. And that's the most important relationship that you have to worry about. And so I think it's just the reminder of like, yes, we have our desires on this earth, but let us keep an eternal perspective. Let's not lose sight of that. And the third point is just that singleness allows for a lot of freedoms, including undivided devotion to the Lord. Okay, so to recap again, why we get married? Isn't God enough? Yes, God is enough, but we have desires that are placed into us. Number two, we need to keep an eternal perspective. Because our life on this earth is such a small fraction compared to what awaits us in eternity. And the third one is that there is a unique freedom that we have when it comes to singleness, and that is undivided devotion to the Lord. So one of the great quotes that I love is that, and I've got a few quotes, and it's by a guy called Ben Stewart. He wrote a book, Single Dating Engaged Marriage. And I really love what he says. He says, realize that if you do get into a relationship and you do get married, realize that you will never get this season of singleness back. Right? If you get into a relationship and you do get married, realize that you will never get this season of singleness back. Right? What you have right now is freedom and time. If you are single, you have freedom and you have time. Like, if I wanted, so recently I went to a conference. If I was married, that would be much harder to do. Not saying I couldn't go to this conference, and it was a very spontaneous decision as well. But if I was married, I have to consider, what does my wife think? If I had kids, I have to consider who's going to look after the kids, right? It's not as easy for me to just say up and go, like decide on Friday and I'm, in Malaysia on Monday, right? You can't be as free. And also I have the resources to do it, right? I don't have any other financial obligations to my family or a family. And so therefore I have that freedom as well. And so these are resources granted to you when you are single that will diminish over time, right? When you have that freedom. You have more freedom, if you are single right now, you have more freedom, more time than any other kind of person on the planet, right? This is Ben Stewart speaking. Children don't have the kind of freedom that you do. Right? Children are, they have to listen to their parents. They don't have money that they earn, right? They are locked in, right, underneath their parents. Old people don't have the level of freedom that you do. They might have the money, but they don't have the health. They don't have the vigor. They don't have the energy like you do right now. And married people don't have that level of freedom either. They have responsibilities to each other. They can't just up and go and leave their responsibilities aside and leave their spouse, right? You have an unprecedented amount of discretionary time that is fast dwindling in this season that you are in right now. And it is freedom with a purpose, right? And this is what Ben Stewart really talks about. And this freedom has a purpose to it. It's not just freedom to just fill it with distractions, but to really pursue an undistracted devotion to the Lord. And that's what it's for, all right? And he kind of references the passage in 1 Corinthians where Paul talks about, undivided devotion or undistracted time with the Lord, right? To pursue the things of the Lord. And so, God has given you singleness to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord, not to fill your time with distractions, but it is a purpose. Its purpose is to pursue Him. If you are frustrated or bitter in your singleness, it may be because you're missing the point of why you are single. I just love that, right? If you're frustrated or bitter with your singleness, maybe you're missing the point on why you are single in the first place. And I think for me, when I was reading this book, and I really encourage you to get the book if you haven't read it. It's such an easy read, and I read the whole book as a single as well. But the thing that really stood out for me is that when I really grasped this concept that, hey, my time of singleness has a purpose, that my time as a single, that there is something valuable to it, that hey, God has got me in this season of singleness for a reason, that's when when I really embraced it. I just want to just kind of end with this. When it comes to like contentment and singleness, and it's something that I've struggled with and continue to, in a way, walk through. I think one of the biggest things is that people bring up this thing of like, are you called to be single? And it's not something that I want to kind of delve in too deeply into this in this podcast, because what does calling even mean? Can someone be called to singleness? Like, what does that even mean? But I really love what I heard once, and I can't remember exactly where I heard it from, so I can't give credit. But it wasn't. This is not my own idea, but it was this idea that it's like, hey, it was essentially a story of this lady who was, I think, like 35 or 40, and loves God, walking with God, and they were, wrestling with this idea of like singleness and like, am I called to singleness? And people would ask her, hey, are you called? Do you think your God has called you to singleness? Like, you're single, and you're also old already. But what she said was really powerful, and essentially she just said that I'm called to singleness today. And it's that idea that, it doesn't matter what lies ahead in 10 years, but it's like, I am walking in obedience to God today. Right now, God has called me today to be single. And how am I going to live my life in a way that is honoring to Him? And I think a key part of that is like just asking God, what does it look like to have obedience today? Yes, I'm called to be single today in this very moment. And so how can I be obedient to you today? And I think that when I really grasped that, I really saw singleness so differently. I wasn't really bitter about it anymore, but it was like, no, God has ordained this season for a reason. And God, I can partner with God in this time to do something. But it has to be that my heart is aligned with that. Because if I'm seeing this season as like, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this, like get me to the next stage, then I think we lose the blessing of and the gift that this time brings, right? Which is being able to be so free to just partner and see what God wants to do in our life. And so I just love that. God has called me to singleness today. I'm not thinking about 20 years time. I'm just thinking about today, right? Not even thinking about tomorrow, because tomorrow has its own problems of its own. And so just really thinking about what does obedience look like for me today. So I think, so I just want to end with that. And if you are struggling with singleness today, I'm with you. I understand. It's not easy. It's not an easy journey. But I think when we begin to shift our perspective to say, hey, how can I be obedient to God today? And what does it look like for me to use my time more wisely? That I will never get the season back. Then I think there's benefit there. Even if you're not a Christian today, it's just recognizing that fact that, hey, I will never if I do eventually get married and have kids, I'll never get this season of singleness back. And so how can I use this wisely, whether I pursue further education, whether I pursue, volunteering or, helping in a third world country or whatever that looks like. How can I use this season well and steward this time well so that, when I look back, I say, why did I waste my time? I guess another point is that, I talked to, there was like some pastors that I talked to, and they're all married. And, I asked them, hey, is there a thing that if you could do your time of singleness back again, what would it be? And pretty much all of them said that we love our wives and we love our kids, but we really wish that we could have, used our time as a single person more effectively. And that was like 3 or 4 pastors who said the same thing. And so I think there is wisdom in that, using your time wisely. So again, so just to end off, just some resources. The book again, Single, Dating, Engaged, Married by Ben Stewart. really great. He also has a few videos online where he talks about the content of the book. So if videos are more up your alley, you can look into that on YouTube. Now, I say straight off that the title may seem like it's promoting progression or an expected progression, but I want to make it clear that I read the book entirely as a single and through the lens of a single, and I think it really helped and impacted me to see the value of singleness. And yes, a lot of people do move from single to dating to engage and then marriage, but the book doesn't push that agenda. And yeah, if you only read the first part on singleness, then I think you've already got your money's worth on that book. But yes, I think the rest of the book is valuable to those thinking about pursuing a relationship. And for those who are in relationships as well, and for those who are engaged and those who are thinking of getting married, I think it's really valuable to read the book. And as a single, I learned so much about what I should look for when I want to pursue a relationship with somebody, and also the struggles and the difficulties that I could possibly, anticipate. And so I highly recommend the book for everybody. I think it's one of the greatest books on singleness and relationships and dating. It's also a very easy read. Again, if you wanted to listen to the full message that I gave on undivided attention, you can go to our church's website, lifegatechurch.org.au, and you can go to the messages, and under young adults messages, you'll be able to find that the message that I preached. We also did a bit of a Q&A as well, so that might be helpful to you as well. So that concludes the podcast. So thank you so much for listening. I really do hope it has been insightful and it has been at least entertaining, if not insightful. As always, if you think this episode would benefit somebody that you know, then please do share it with them. If you'd like to hear more about what we're talking about, life topics and stuff, please follow us on this journey. You can follow us on Spotify, podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this on, YouTube as well. If you have any feedback or any testimonies or requests for future topics, you can email me directly at jameschiar.ministries@gmail.com, or you can DM me on Instagram @_ James Chia. But yeah, ultimately, my prayer is that this podcast will be able to bless people and to help them through navigating, especially their young adult years. But yeah, this has been the JC podcast. I hope you have a blessed week ahead. And I just feel led to just pray and to close this time, especially for those who are single. So I'm just going to pray. God, we thank you so much that you love us. That you have enabled us to be in relationship with you, that the greatest blessing that we have is being in an intimate relationship with you. And I just want to pray, especially for those who are single, who are listening to this, who are maybe perhaps struggling with their singleness, who are wrestling with, even making this their identity, that, hey, I'm a single, I'm going to stay single forever. I just pray, Lord, that you would encourage them that, hey, this time of singleness, you have a purpose for that. And I pray that they'll be able to shift their mindset to be able to see that, hey, how can I be obedient today? That I'm called to singleness today. I'm not going to think about 20, 30 years from now, 10 years, or even the next year. But today, how can I be obedient to your calling today? And I just pray that, it is still a desire that you have for us. And so I pray that, that if it is your will, Lord, that you would fulfill those desires in the right time, in the right context, in the right place, and that we'll be able to give you the glory for that if that is your will for us. But yeah, thank you so much for this time that we've been able to spend together, and I pray that you would bless those who are listening in their week ahead. So we ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. Thanks so much for joining, and have a great week, and God bless.